That predicts wide human displacement, violence, and other catastrophes as the planet's climate changes. As you have likely heard on the news, the International Panel on Climate Change says that human security, along with health, is in grave danger unless governments act quickly to address the impacts of climate change. But the multi volume report also suggests that humanity has the ability to adapt and, in some cases, to even capitalize on climate change. Paul Kovacs is one of the authors of the North American section of the report. He is the executive director of the University of Western Ontario based Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. We reached him in Georgetown, Ontario.
Mr. Kovacs, a large amount of this climate change report says that we have to start to adapt to climate change. Is that a kind of admission that governments are not likely to do what's necessary to reverse climate change?
The evidence is pretty overwhelming that the weather starts to change and that there's more change coming. The change over the next 10, 25 years is pretty well set. That's going to come no matter what we do. The international discussions focus on what the weather and changes we might impact on the weather looking out 50 or 100 years. But over the next 10 or 25 years, it's pretty well set. And if we don't adapt, it's going to be pretty tough.
But is it a kind of, well, we're not seeing any change. The government's numbers of them won't even admit that it's happening. And if they do admit, then we see it in our own country, in Canada, that we're so far behind, and even the revised targets for reducing greenhouse gases. So is this what we're up against? Is this that basically we're going to have to start thinking about what we have to do to cope?
Well, my specialty is adaptation, and I'm not actually an expert on some of the other issues about emissions reduction and energy, et cetera. And one of our key findings is I think we need to do a bit of both. Regardless where the international discussions go or where our national efforts go, there is scope to adapt. We've started to show some evidence that it's beginning to take place, but we should do more. And adaptation is going to be part of the overall local, national, international solution.
Making that, and this is what the report does, this latest report, it's very strong on this idea that there have to be two strategies, as you just mentioned, to cut emissions, but also to adapt to change. But is there a danger that governments will look at that and not say that's doing both, but that it's an either or, or do more of one than the other, i.e., we'll figure out how to adapt to this. It's too painful to try and to cut the emissions or to reverse the effects of climate change. Is there a danger of that?
Well, Carrie, your discussion is focusing on government, and that's not an area that I actually am a specialist in. And so there are some audiences out there, and I do a lot of work with insurance companies. Insurance companies are focusing on their efforts. The change in the climate is affecting their business right now. They're trying to understand what's coming next, and they're trying to plan and prepare for that. So insurance companies are adapting their behavior, and there's many other players in society who are simply getting on with adaptation. They're recognizing that the weather's changed and more is coming, and that the right way to behave going forward is different. You're absolutely right. Government's got many different elements, and government has to figure out a much more complicated story here. But for some players, it's pretty straightforward. They simply need to get on, and for some, they need to adapt.
Is there anywhere where you're studying that there is a regard that there might be opportunities for some?
No question about it. It is a very complicated world, and big changes are coming, and there are some people who are stepping in and helping. If I take it on a much smaller scale, those of us who are doing studies, and if they're useful and helpful to those people, I'm getting more funding than I had in the past because my work has proven to be helpful. So that's a very small element here. But there's no question, change in a complicated world does bring some opportunities. It's also bringing a lot of risks and challenges, and certainly the science talks at great length about the risks.
But not just opportunities for those who can come up with innovations and ways of creating businesses that help people adapt, but in fact that there are climate change winners and losers.
Definitely climate change is a complicated piece, so there's many, many different elements to it. My specialty is usually very extreme events and some of the impacts they're having. Extreme events are usually doing a lot of damage, and we're going to see more of that coming forward. So if there's an opportunity side in the area that I know the best with extreme events doing damage, it's the rebuilding afterward. There's people who really know how to put things back and build them all over again and hopefully build them better. That is a form of opportunity, but it's an awfully difficult way to describe as an opportunity.
Isn't it better not to have to put things back together again, no matter how good people are at doing that?
Yeah, and again, part of what we're trying to share from the IPCC work is that there's some inevitability that's coming, that the weather has already started to change and more is coming, and that certainly over the next 10, 25 years, much of that change is now set. And so over that time period, it's really important to try to learn how to cope with the fact that, you know, the storms and the floods and whatever are very strong, and we can adapt and we can do a little better, and we need to. If you're looking further out, there is scope to try to influence what the weather might be in 50 or 100 years or 200 years. And that's a really important discussion, and I'm really proud of my colleagues who are participating in that, and I hope them success.
There was a controversial aspect of the executive summary of this latest report where there was a decision to exclude the information that it was going to cost $100 billion a year to offset climate change. And that was removed because a number of governments, including the United States, didn't want that in. It was just too scary, I guess. Do you think there's, among your clients, that they're seeing that they don't want to confront the real cost of this?
The weather started to change and more is coming, and we simply have to get on and cope with that. There's certainly not complete agreement on the precise number and the value, but there's no question that great change is coming and that there will be a cost of dealing with that. That cost is spread over many people, and everybody has to figure out their part of it. But anyway, all the people I deal with, they are starting to increasingly say, let's get on with this. Let's start to figure out what it is that our particular group needs to do to address the change that is affecting us.
Mr. Kovacs, thank you.
It's great to talk with you, Carol.
Paul Kovacs is the Executive Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. He is also one of the authors of a new report by the International Panel on Climate Change. We reached him in Georgetown, Ontario.